Sometimes when we think about our legacy, we think about the times where we will not be here anymore. And we think, who is going to remember that legacy? And we certainly think of family and those that are close to us. And I think Rodney, who's predeceased by many years by his loving wife, considers that a big legacy of himself as father, grandfather, great-grandfather, that adds to who he is as a person. But so many people have been touched by his life that he will never meet, through his books, through the documentary. And I go back to the first book that we know. It was never about a hot dog and a Coke. His personal account, as a teenager in the 1960s, the sit-in demonstrations in Jacksonville, Florida, and Axe Handle Saturday. This climate, with all of what we have today, was truly a different world in Jacksonville. This violent event, which was not covered by our local news, and Rodney's book is really the only historically accurate description of the sit-ins and the violence. His 3 other books and other documentaries have reached out to tell people what went on, but more importantly, what is still going on. And the history that he gives us of firsts in Jacksonville, with Prudential as being hired as a young black man, the work he did with public broadcasting, 2 terms in city council. These are firsts that now have been a legacy for many others to follow suit. But it's not the first that I recognize Rodney for, it's the continuing verse that he gives. So Rodney, please welcome Rodney Hurst. Thank you.
Good morning. Minister Racine, to my friends Marilyn and Ryan, to my friend Faye. It's good to be with you this morning. I am always impressed when I come to the Unitarian Church and sit and talk with truth tellers. Marilyn's husband, Ike, years ago, first introduced me and others to this different kind of white denomination. It was in the Riverside, Avondale area at that time. So I'm always glad to be with you. So Minister Racine has been very, very generous in giving me a few minutes to share with you, and thank you for those kind words. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide. Then it is the brave man and woman who chooses doubting in their abject spirit till the very Lord is crucified. I started school when I was 5 and I got skipped. And my pastor says, favor ain't fair. And for those of you who don't know what favor ain't fair means, just ask somebody. I walked around Jacksonville as a pre-teener, looking at the signs that said colored in white and Negro in white, and getting on the municipal bus, the city bus system, with a sign that says white sit from front, colored sit from rear. Traveling to South Carolina with my grandmother, we would go straight to the back of the bus. Going into a local department store, there were no shopping centers at that time. All of the shopping was concentrated in downtown. And you would walk to the store because the stores wanted me as a black shopper and my family as black shoppers to come in and spend our money, but only where they wanted us to spend money, which did not include that white lunch counter. In Woolworth's, it was at the left, 85 seats, windows, nice signs, and at the back of the store, there was a colored lunch counter. Behind the aquarium supplies, the dog foods, the uniforms, the picture frames, that colored lunch counter with 15 seats. And no one could answer for me why there was this separation. Why were water fountains side by side? One sign said colored, and the other sign said white. Why were the bathrooms saying colored men, colored women, white women? And the answer that I invariably got was, that's just the way things are. And it wasn't until I enrolled at Isaiah Blocker Junior High School, which was one of two segregated black junior high schools at that time, in the Negro division of the Duval County public school system, that I met an 8th grade American history teacher named Rutledge Henry Pearson. Who said to his class, freedom is not free. If you are not a part of the solution, then you are part of the problem. And then later he would encourage his students to join the Youth Council NAACP. And when I joined at age 11, that's when I first met Ike Williams. We had an American history textbook, Life in These United States, 600 plus pages. Mr. Pearson would tell us about the authors and what the book contained, how many chapters, how many pages. Then he would slam the book down on his desk and he would say, leave it home. Because he did not refuse to teach us American history. These black students of his, from a history book that only included the names of George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington, as if they were the only blacks who made salient contributions to American society. So he took the class and he divided us into pairs and clusters. And we wrote letters to John Hope Franklin and Althea Gibson and Jackie Robinson and Thurgood Marshall, those blacks who were making a difference in this country at that time. He gave us a list of books to read and to do a book report on. At age 11 in Mr. Pearson's class in 8th grade, I chose the book entitled The Slave Who Freed Haiti. It was about Toussaint Louverture, who was the only enslaved person in the Western Hemisphere that led a successful slave revolt. One of the tragedies in America today is that white America demonizes things that should be of educational value. I call American history incomplete, dishonest, and racist. And we ban black history. And we ban black history books. And we demonize non-threatening words like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And anything related to that, if you worked in an area like that, if you got a grant, if you just walked down the street proclaiming DEI, that made you subject to some kind of criminal prosecution. If you were a teacher and taught like that, you could lose your teacher's license. America, this land of the free and the home of the brave. What we're doing to our young people today is criminal. We are making them educational cripples, at least here in the state of Florida. The fact that at age 11, some 70 years ago, I had an American history teacher who would not let us become educational cripples. Even in these days, in those days of abject racism and discrimination and bigotry. If I gave everyone in this room a Black History test, how many would pass? If I gave everybody in this room an American history test, how many would pass? One of my friends, now deceased, great colleague, great truth teller, Unitarian, Dr. James Lowen of the All Souls Unitarian Church. He passed in 2021. Again, Jim and I have been friends for a number of years, and his family invited me as the only non-family member to speak at his service. Jim wrote the book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. Minister Racine, please keep me on task with time. When we are taught that Africans are responsible for slavery, when we are taught that slavery would not have happened, but African tribes, as they captured persons, they sold them into slavery. As we are taught that slaves enjoyed being enslaved because you never read about any revolts in the history books. That's what we pass off as American history. We don't say that in America during the time of slavery, every white religious denomination supported slavery. In 1838, Georgetown College, which was founded by Jesuit priests, now Georgetown University, they got in trouble keeping the doors of Georgetown College open, and they sold 273 of their enslaved persons to get enough money to keep Georgetown College open. And upon further research, the president of Georgetown University now found out that those Jesuit priests owned 5 slave plantations in Virginia, Maryland, and in Louisiana. The National Episcopal Church, and at one time I was an Episcopalian, said very publicly, their presiding bishop, that slavery is not a moral issue. Slavery is a political issue, and because the Episcopal Church does not deal with political issues, we only deal with moral issues, we're not going to take a stand on slavery because slavery is not moral, slavery is political. Southern Baptists in 1845 met in Augusta, Georgia for the sole purpose of starting the Southern Baptist Convention to support slavery. The whole concept of considering a dark-skinned race of people as property to assuage your feelings and not consider them human beings. So therefore, if I think of you as property and I can treat you like I would treat a broom or a chair or a table in a room, because you are inanimate African, you are property. We study in American history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Words written by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, and my American history textbook, and no American history resource material that I've ever been to on college campuses or public schools say that at the time he wrote those words, Thomas Jefferson owned more enslaved persons in Albemarle County, Virginia, than any other person. Of the first 18 presidents of this country, 12 owned slaves, and 8 of the 12 owned slaves when they were in the White House. Thomas Jefferson took it a step further. One of the persons that he owned, and let's understand that. You owned another human being. And we tolerated that. This country. Just like we tolerate what is happening to persons who look different. Just like we tolerate the demonization of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we wonder, where is the hope? The hope is gone because we refuse to tell the truth about this country. One of the persons that Thomas Jefferson owned was named Sarah Sally Hemings. She had 6 children from Thomas Jefferson. Oh, Mr. Hurst, you know, they had such a beautiful relationship. There was no relationship if I owned you. You don't have a choice. So he raped her enough times where she conceived and she bared or born 6 children. And in 2002, DNA testing confirmed that the children, the offspring of Sarah Sally Hemings, were also the offspring of Thomas Jefferson. My American history textbook did not tell me that the writer of the Three Musketeers, Alexander Dumas, he wrote The Three Musketeers, The Man in the Iron Mask, The Count of Monte Cristo. Alexander Dumas was black. Did not tell me that Alexander Pushkin, the father of Russian literature, was black. Did not tell me that Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg, the great-great-great-grandmother of the recently deceased Queen of England, was black. Did not tell me that St. Augustine, one of the seminal figures in Christianity in the 7th and 8th century, and for whom St. Augustine is named, was black. Did not tell me that Hannibal the Great, with his hordes of elephants, conquering nations throughout the world, was black. Did not tell me that Ludwig von Beethoven, father and grandfather, were Moors, Spanish Africans. Did not tell me that Daniel Hale Williams, black, performed the first open heart surgery. Did not tell me that Matt Henson, black, was the first person to set foot on the North Pole. Did not tell me that Garrett Morgan, black, invented the gas mask and the variation of the traffic light that we use today. Did not tell me that Granville Wood, black, invented a device that goes on the train to let a train engineer know when another train is close. Did not tell me that Elijah McCoy, black, responsible for 45 inventions, including 15 inventions for long-distance trucking and lubrication. And during his time, when they said, "I want the real McCoy," they were talking about inventions by Elijah McCoy. Did not tell me about the Harlem Hellfighters, 100,000 plus black and Hispanic soldiers in World War I who were finally sent to Europe to fight with France, but sent as menial workers. And when the French finally said, "We need soldiers," they changed the mission of these Harlem Hellfighters so that they could fight, which turned World War I. You probably have never even heard of the Harlem Hellfighters. 17 of the Harlem Hellfighters eventually got the Congressional Medal of Honor. They did such a good job, and the French honored these Harlem Hellfighters with their highest civilian and military awards, which led Colonel Laude, L-A-U-D-E, to send a letter from this country to the government of France and the military saying, "Don't recognize these Negro soldiers. If you do that, it would make them think that they are equal, and they would come back to this country thinking they are equal to us." 1925, the United States Army commissioned a study that came to the conclusion that blacks did not have the mental intellect, the knowledge to be officers. So we don't teach that. We teach that Betsy Ross sold the first flag. She did not. We teach that Benjamin Franklin put a key on a kite, flew the kite up in the air to have the key on the kite struck by lightning, and therefore Benjamin Franklin invented electricity or discovered electricity. That never happened. We are taught that Paul Revere got on a horse and rode from Lexington to Concord saying, to arms, the redcoats are coming, the British are coming. That never happened. We are taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America. Christopher Columbus landed on Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He encountered indigenous people called the Arawak Tanos, or Tanos Arawak indigenous people. There were 300,000 Tanos on Hispaniola. Because they were freedom-loving and not a fighting culture, Christopher Columbus and his men who had weapons, Tanos did not, immediately started to enslave the Tanos, sending the young Tanos girls back to Spain and Italy as sex slaves. In 50 years, the Tanos had been wiped out of the island of Hispaniola. Christopher Columbus was the first slave trader in this hemisphere, and his son, Diego Columbus, was the first slave trader of African flesh. How do you celebrate? There are only 2 holidays in this country on the annual calendar that's named for individuals. Martin Luther King Day, Christopher Columbus Day. How do you celebrate the discovery of America for someone who never landed in the continental United States? But that's what we teach. And the reason we don't teach some of the other stuff is because, according to the governor of Florida and others, we don't want white folk to feel guilty and uncomfortable. So to heck with the truth. Tell convenient lies. And since that floats many a boat, that's what we do. And we don't complain about it. And when black folk talk about discrimination, when we talk about racism, in this culture clash called America, we end up saying, oh, there go them niggas again. Always talking about racism. When we coddle and turn a blank eye to racists and their core racist attitudes, we get what we have in this country today. Because a racist is not just anti-black. A racist is anti-female, anti-Catholic, anti-academic, anti-truth, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-different. And that's where we are. Let me close. Young lady earlier talked about hope. And the fact from time to time she feels stuck. And I always say to folk, you can get tired, but you cannot get weary. One of the great human beings, Jacksonville native son, black, James Weldon Johnson wrote, "Lift every voice and sing, here in Jacksonville, on the campus of the Bethel Baptist Institutional Church. He wrote that hymn, even though some refer to it as the national anthem, but he wrote that hymn in 1900 when blacks were being lynched in this country on an average of 3 to 5 a week. So I want to revisit that last verse with you again. And just like my friend Ryan had you touch someone, touch somebody again. I know we're in the middle of the pandemic. And those of you who don't want to touch anyone, do the Wakanda touch. And listen to the words that James Weldon Johnson wrote in his majestic third verse when he said, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. And this great, revered native son of Jacksonville, this first black attorney in the state of Florida, this former diplomat and ambassador, this first black executive director of the NAACP from 1920 to 1930, he concluded this great majestic hymn by saying, shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God and true to our native land. The struggle continues. Thank you.